Hey, what's going on, everybody? Special guest Chris Vinel from the Daytona Beach News-Journal here to talk about Bethune-Cookman. The season has finally started, so we're going to get into a lot of Bethune-Cookman stuff, the team that they have, the players, and also how it relates to Miami, maybe some things to watch for. Chris, what's going on?
I'm doing fabulous. How about yourself?
Doing well, man. I can't believe it's finally here. We spent so much time with the offseason and talking about everything. And from a Miami standpoint, everyone's looking ahead to that Texas A&M game in week 3. But here we are, week 1, first game for Mario Cristobal, 3:30 p.m. ACC Network on Saturday, Hard Rock Stadium. They're expecting a good crowd. We'll see how it plays out. But Chris, with Daytona, just with Bethune-Cookman here, 2-9 a year ago, but a lot of new faces. I don't want to touch too much on 21 because I think they've got an interesting team.
Sure.
Let's start. Terry Sims's group. You said you were out of practice. Maybe kind of initial takeaways before we get into the personnel, but just your overall thoughts, kind of your takeaways with this team.
One of the big things about Bethune-Cookman this year is just the turnover they've had. They went 2-9 a year ago. In 2020, they were still in the MEAC, which canceled their season. So they didn't even play in 2020 due to COVID. And you don't really know what you're going to get with this team for a number of reasons. One of them being they have three new coordinators. They have a new offensive coordinator who was last at Maryland. That's Mike Canales. He's been all over the place. And the one thing we do know about him and about Terry Sims is they want to play fast. Now, will they be able to accomplish that and move the ball effectively? We'll find out, but they want to play fast. On the defensive side, it's a guy who's been around for a little while. They elevated Darren Hayes to the defensive coordinator position. He's been at Bethune-Cookman the entire time that Terry Sims has been there as the defensive backs coach. So he just steps up into that new role. And Sims told me that things really aren't going to change on the defensive side. They're still going to be really a 4-2-5 defense, but it's just maybe the presentation is going to be a little bit different, or Hayes will bring a couple of new ideas, give you some different looks, that sort of thing. And then special teams, however much stock you put in special teams coordinators, they've got a new one of those to with Kenyatta McCoy. So you don't really know exactly what you're going to get from a schematic standpoint, and they've got some new players to supplement those changes.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Like you mentioned, plenty of experience with that coaching staff. Let's get into the quarterback. Jalen Jones there, played at Florida, Jackson State, or was at Florida, didn't really play. But anyways, played at Jackson State, community college last year. Look, this is a guy, former 4-star recruit, 6'4", 210, looks all of it, I think fans will get a first take look at him in terms of, sometimes when you see these FCS teams, the size might not be there, but he clearly has it. Your thoughts on Jalen? And certainly as his team is constructed, he's got to have a good game here.
Terry Sims the other day refused to name a starting quarterback in week 1. He said there's still 3 guys battling for it. Jalen's one of them. And he did kind of hint to me that Jalen's the front runner. I'd be shocked if he didn't start on Saturday. He seems like the guy. He was running with the first team the entire practice that I was out there this week. And in the past, he's been running with the first team as well. So it's probably going to be him. But yeah, he looks the part. And he brings kind of the dual threat nature that Bethune-Cookman hasn't had the last year or two. They were kind of one-dimensional in terms of quarterback's going to throw it, running back's going to run it. Now I saw them mixing in like some read option stuff, just some modern things in the offense that they didn't really have the availability to run with their quarterback skill set the last couple of years. He's going to bring that dual threat nature. He had over 600 rushing yards at Jackson State, along with his passing success. And people, if you go back and look at his stat line at Jackson State, where he had his most experience, he was actually pretty good. He started the first 5 games of the Dion era, and through the first 2 or 3 games, didn't throw any interceptions. He had like a 12 or 15 to nothing touchdown to interception ratio, and then he had 2 bad games. Jackson State lost them both, and Dion said, "All right, you're hitting the bench." And he never really saw the field again. So that's why the transfer. That's why he got out of there. He just wanted the playing time, and he knew Dion's son was coming into Jackson State and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think he's going to bring a really dynamic element to this Bethune-Cookman offense, and he's got some weapons to throw to too. That's something that they've really emphasized the last year or so, is kind of replenishing their offensive weapons through the transfer portal, especially at tight end and wide receiver.
And Miami, this will be our first look on the field at this defensive line. Look, I felt like this is going to be a strength of this team in spring ball. A lot of these transfers were not here. We've seen it in practices, but this will be an opportunity, and they're going to need to get to the quarterback. That's going to be obviously a point of emphasis all season long. But in a game like this, you're looking to overwhelm the offensive line of Bethune and get to Jalen or whoever the quarterback might be out there. But, it will be interesting. Miami's going to come off the edge, and there's some other things I want to talk about with the defensive ends as it moves forward. You touched on Bethune's offensive weapons. It starts with Kamari Averett, in my opinion. Look, we touched on the size with Jalen at 6'6", 250. You're going to wonder why he's at Bethune. He was previously at Louisville. All of it, All-American last year, big-time numbers at the tight end spot. This is where I think if you're talking about Miami, winning a battle, obviously looking to win the game, but they need to play well against the tight end. This is a big challenge for Miami's linebackers. He had 52 catches, nearly 900 yards and 10 touchdowns a year ago. What more can you add about Kamari, his level of ability, talent, and maybe going into this game? It's a big one for him, for NFL draft prospect, looking to be one of those guys that shines in a game like this.
And he's been on some draft boards. If you go online and just Google him, you'll see him popping up in draft conversations. Now, this is the biggest game on Bethune-Cookman's schedule, obviously, from an opponent's standpoint. They're not going to see anyone else like Miami. So like you said, he's going to need to show out, or at least show some flashes, show he can win some high-level matchups if he wants to get to that level. Of course, he's probably going to dominate, other SWAC competition this year like he did a year ago. But yeah, he's been around for a long time. He's a graduate student who's been, I believe, in college since 2017, formerly at Louisville, like you said. And he actually played a little bit there, not a ton, eventually transferred to Bethune-Cookman, and last year was his first year on the field after that 2020 season was canceled. But it's going to be interesting to see how the new quarterback kind of gels with him early on. I think if you got this matchup, in week 6, 7, 8, somewhere down the line later in the season, it might be a little more tight-knit. But I could see them having some growing pains. And I could also see that if it's Jalen Jones on Saturday, him looking to Kamari Averett a lot. He's going to be the top target. They brought in Corey Reed Jr. on the outside, who's also going to be an interesting piece because he comes over from Jackson State as well as a wide receiver with playing time there. And has that chemistry, has that already built-in friendship with Jalen Jones. But Kamari is going to be huge. And Terry Sims talked the other day. The biggest thing for him, he's pretty much shown what he needs to show on the field for this Bethune-Cookman team. It's just about a leadership standpoint now. They want him to step up into that role, become that vocal guy. And he was very vocal this week at practice.
Yeah, I'm sure. It's a big one. And I think when I talked about Miami's defensive line. Look, the linebackers, as I mentioned, Caleb Johnson, Corey Flagg, it seems like those will be our top two Miami linebackers going into, especially in nickel situations, the way it stands. And I think being able to guard and make sure that the tight end doesn't go off. And I think this is going to be a big thing because I think this is a game where if he does really well, other teams are obviously going to scout this game and look, Miami's vulnerable against the tight end because other teams are going to feel confident in their tight end abilities. So there's a lot that plays into it. Again, it's a kind of a game within a game. And I think this is a big matchup. And also, when I touched on the defensive line, look, I've seen with Miami's stand-up defensive ends that they're doing a lot. They do drop back in coverage at sometimes in practices. So I could see them trying to shadow the defensive or the tight end in this game a little bit too, just to provide a little bit more protection or guarding him a little bit better. So there's ways to stop a tight end, but he definitely has a lot of skills. You touched on Corey Reed, another guy, 6'3", 205, big receiver. They talk about more about their weapons. They've got some guys back that did some things a year ago.
Yeah, Corey Reed is probably the biggest addition from the transfer portal. He had over 320 receiving yards and a couple of touchdowns a couple years ago at Jackson State, did not play last year. But their biggest returner is in the backfield. They have Kayshawn Byrd, who is their returning running back. He had over 600 yards rushing last year. He's their number one guy, pretty much unquestioned. And Terry Sims was talking the other day, we need him to be a two-way guy. You're going to see him catch screen passes, swing passes. We need him to be someone who's going to be a threat not only out of the backfield in the running game, but out of the backfield in the receiving game. And he's shown the ability to do that in the past. He's had a little bit more competition in years past than he does this year in terms of backfield mates. You're going to see Jimmy Robinson factor in there a little bit. He's probably their top backup, but Sims is expecting huge things from Byrd. And I don't know I'll tell you, I do know that Miami, Bethune-Cookman is not going to out physical Miami. That's not going to happen up front. So Byrd may struggle for running room. It probably will. but going forward, he's a guy to watch for sure.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. You know, we touched on that 2-9 a year ago. They lost their first 8 games. The offense did pick it up again. It's going to be a new look offense. So I don't want to go too much into it, but it seemed like, Robinson was a guy that, Daryl Powell stepped up those last 3 games. They averaged about 29 points a game in the final 3, won 2 of the 3. So, there's some guys that did some things. Let's flip this, Chris, to defense. And this is where Miami should have a lot of advantages. This is where games like this can get out of hand. Miami should be able to overwhelm them both running and passing. If there's any type of struggle, certainly you're not excited to see that on either front. Miami's got to get their receivers going. They've got to get them some confidence. Again, we're talking about week 3 build to week 3 with that Southern Miss game in between. And I think at the wide receiver position, the passing game, what you have in Tyler Van Dyke, but just getting those receivers some confidence going deep and being able to strike there. And obviously no problems with the running game. They've got to be able to run the ball there. Tell me about their defense, but also there's a couple corners that stand out to me. A guy from Dillard down here, Amari Hill-Robinson, 4 picks, 8 breakups a year ago. Certainly when we talk about going deep, he's a guy that does not want that to happen. So what else do they have on defense? You touched on the 4-2-5.
Yeah, the strength of their defense is absolutely their secondary. And like I said, the scheme really isn't changing for them, even though they do have the new coordinator. They gave up 36 points per game last year, and that's in the SWAC. They didn't really have an opponent like Miami in terms of, talent level and offensive explosion or potential offensive explosion. But the strength is their secondary. And I don't know if that really helps you in a game like Miami because up front, you're not going to get much of a pass rush. Hopefully, if you're Miami fans, you're not going to get much of a pass rush if you're Bethune-Cookman on Miami quarterbacks. And they're going to have all day to kind of dissect that secondary. And, if you give a quarterback time, even against a good secondary, it probably isn't going to turn out well for you. But Amari Hill-Robinson is the guy to watch back there. He was telling me the other week his goals this year are pretty simple. Go all-conference first team, go all-American, and win a SWAC title. And that's pretty simple. He had 4 interceptions last year and shut down some of the best receivers in the SWAC. But he's got a couple of running mates too. And there is if I was to pick one weakness of this Bethune-Cookman defense, it would be their linebackers. They don't have a ton of depth at linebacker. And so they're really going to count on, their nickel guys and that sort of thing to step up.
Chris, I should have asked this earlier, and you kind of touched on it with Kamari there, but maybe the mindset or your gathering of it, maybe when you're out of practice or with this team heading into a matchup against Miami, could you get a sense on their thoughts and going into this one?
Yeah, I think it's just don't back down. You're gonna see the highest level competition that you're gonna see all year. So just go out and get those reps and see what you can do against these guys. It's a good test, especially after you went 2-9 in the SWAC last year. You lose by 40 points. Okay, well, did you score? Did you do simple things that might be confidence boosters down the line when you get into your tough conference schedule? They've got Jackson State in Jacksonville. At the Jacksonville Jaguars Stadium. They lost to their biggest rival, Florida A&M, last year for the first time in a decade. Things like that are the important games to them, but they're not checking this one off and saying, well, we don't care. It's definitely, I wouldn't say it's a negative vibe at all. They're very positive going into it, but I think they're also realistic in saying we're still adjusting to all these changes. We just need to try to get on the same page, get some things going, and see what we can do.
And again, from a Miami standpoint, all of this game, next game is a build up to that Texas A&M game to be ready for that. And that's where Miami needs to look at it. Again, regardless of how the score ends up, they've got to win in these certain game within a game battles. I think that's how you kind of look at it from Miami standpoint. Certainly you don't want sloppiness, whether it's turnovers or penalties or anything like that. And I think from a Miami standpoint too, we'll all be looking at the depth. They've been talking about this depth. Well, and I expect them to roll it out. So maybe you're not going to get that true indication in terms of playing time, but it will be interesting to see who actually they roll out there, new coaching staff, and new players looking to step up with their roles. So Chris, I appreciate you taking the time to do this. It should be an exciting season all the way around. So thanks again, man, and take care.
Absolutely. Thank you.